And thanks to you at home for joining us for this next hour. I got to tell you, we have kind of a big show tonight. We've got a number of guests who I'm very excited to talk to tonight, but also just there is a lot going on. We've got some exclusive information tonight, and we've got a sort of a roundup about what's happened over the course of today. But these are times when it is worth paying attention. And here's a specific thing that I think is worth paying attention to. Mike Flynn resigned as National Security Advisor on February 13th. It was very big news, obviously. No National Security Advisor has ever had a tenure that short. Also, no administration has ever lost someone that senior, ever, for lying about and concealing contacts with a foreign government. And in time, we would also learn that Mike Flynn had been a paid agent of a foreign government. We learned that when he retroactively registered after he had left the White House. NBC News has since reported that the Trump transition was actually aware of payments that Mike Flynn had received from foreign governments, but apparently they did not see that as a red flag to be worried about hiring him, nor did they require him to report those payments, which his security clearance required him to do. In time, we would also learn, actually just this past week, we would also learn that Mike Flynn was required to get a new security clearance from the CIA in order to take the National Security Advisor job. But the Trump transition apparently didn't make him get that before they gave him the national security job anyway. In time, we would also come to learn that the outgoing president, Barack Obama, had specifically, personally, directly warned the incoming president-elect that he should not make Mike Flynn his national security advisor. But the president-elect and the new White House ignored all of that. And they put him in place anyway. See, it was very, very important that Mike Flynn get into that job, despite all those screaming reasons why he should not. Even when the Department of Justice brought worse warnings than that to the White House. Warnings in the first week of the new administration that the National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, was lying about his contact with the Russians. Warnings that his underlying conduct that was known to the Justice Department was itself problematic when it came to the Russians, even aside from him lying about it. Warnings that he was compromised by the Russians, that he was potentially vulnerable to them blackmailing him while he was serving as National Security Advisor. Even after those warnings, we now know they kept him in place. Yesterday, the White House spokesman even confirmed that after those warnings from the Justice Department, the White House did nothing to restrict Mike Flynn's access to sensitive information, nor did they take any other action to protect national security and state secrets from a man they had just been informed might be being blackmailed, might be being coerced by Russia, while he had access to the highest level secrets in the entire U.S. government. So, in time, we would come to learn all of that mind-bending information about Mike Flynn and how he got into the White House and what he was doing there and how the White House treated all of the security concerns around him. In time, we would learn all of that. But on February 13th, on the day he resigned, we didn't know all of that stuff. On February 13th, we only knew that Mike Flynn had just become the shortest-serving national security advisor in U.S. history. On February 13th, we knew that this guy hadn't even lasted 4 weeks. Before we could even start to absorb that information, though, before we could even start to figure out all the backstory on Mike Flynn that has proved to be so damning and so illuminating in the weeks and months since, before we could even absorb that, before we could even start digging into it, that story, that Mike Flynn just resigned as National Security Advisor, that story got its tail stepped on. Because Mike Flynn resigned on February 13th, and then the very next day, February 14th, is when the New York Times dropped this. Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. And, you know, once you see that, like, oh, right, okay, at that point, yeah. Oh, it's interesting that the National Security Advisor had to resign yesterday, but holy, look at this. I mean, this was remarkable, right? Phone records and intercepted calls showed that members of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and other Trump associates had repeated contact with senior Russian intelligence officials in the year before the election. Quote, American law enforcement and intelligence agencies intercepted the communications around the same time they were discovering evidence that Russia was trying to disrupt the presidential election. Quote, the intercepts alarmed American intelligence and law enforcement agencies. Quote, the National Security Agency, which monitors the communications of foreign intelligence services, the NSA initially captured these calls between Trump's associates and the Russians as part of routine foreign surveillance. After that, the FBI asked the NSA to collect as much information as possible about these Russian operatives that were on the phone calls with Trump people. They asked them to search through troves of previous intercepted communications that had not been analyzed. Bombshell, right? Valentine's Day bombshell. Trump campaign officials and Trump associates have repeated contact with senior Russian intelligence officials and other Russian government officials while Russia is attacking the United States, then to try to sway the election in Trump's favor. Just bombshell. Comes out February 14th. Comes out one day after the Mike Flynn resignation, which was over his surreptitious contacts with Russian officials. But it steps right on the tail of that story. It's just huge. It sort of occludes, right, the impact of the Mike Flynn story, because this story the next day is even bigger than that. But then something happened to that story, remember? Right, February 13th, Flynn resigns. February 14th, New York Times posts this bombshell story, right? What was the headline? Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. February 14th. And February 15th, the next day, something very unusual happened. The deputy director of the FBI went to the White House for a 7:30 a.m. White House meeting on what was reportedly an unrelated intelligence matter. And at the end of that 7:30 a.m. meeting, the deputy director of the FBI had a private pull-aside, a little private pull-aside one-on-one meeting with the White House chief of staff, Reince Priebus. Deputy director of the FBI, quote, spoke with White House chief of staff Reince Priebus for 5 minutes after a 7:30 a.m. meeting at the White House on February 15th. According to senior administration officials who briefed reporters on the matter, quote, the deputy director of the FBI told Reince Priebus, I want you to know the story in the New York Times is BS. Deputy director of the FBI telling the White House, hey, that New York Times story about Trump campaign contacts with Russian officials, that's a bad story, that's BS. That's really weird, right? I mean, first of all, there's an ongoing FBI investigation of the president's campaign. No one in the FBI, let alone the deputy director, should be talking to the president's staff about that ongoing investigation at all. That literally and directly compromises the FBI's ongoing investigation. You're talking to the target of the investigation. Second of all, that contact, that strange contact between the deputy director of the FBI and the White House chief of staff, that led to one of the most bizarre compromises of the other investigations into Trump and Russia. I mean, after the White House chief of staff got that this story is BS advice from the FBI's deputy director, the White House then enlisted these two Republicans, Congressman Devin Nunes on the left side of your screen, Senator Richard Burr on the right side of your screen. The White House enlisted them, asked them to do a favor here, asked them to start calling reporters at all the major news outlets to steer other reporters away from the Times' bombshell story. And, you know, you work at a news organization, that's a heavyweight call. That's heavyweight advice. If you get a call from Devin Nunes or Richard Burr telling you to stay away from a story, it's BS. Right? Because these guys aren't just regular members of Congress. They are the chairman of the intelligence committees in the House and in the Senate. So these guys theoretically would be in a position to know what they were talking about on a story like this. It was also a big deal because these are the two guys who were supposedly leading two big congressional investigations into this very subject, into the White House Russia connections. And the White House had them making phone calls, warning reporters off this New York Times story as a favor to the White House. And apparently, on a recommendation, an improper communication from the deputy director of the FBI, who told the White House chief of staff something about the FBI's investigation, said, this story about what we've found and what we're looking at, it's all BS. So this is the mishigas that happened right after Mike Flynn got fired. And that was so screwed up in so many ways. I mean, so many days in this new administration, you're like, wow, that's a mess. I can't believe that happened. This thing was so screwed up at every level. I mean, there's the guys leading these supposedly independent investigations into the White House making PR calls about that investigation to reporters at the behest of the White House. There's the FBI, which is supposedly leading the other independent investigation of the White House, talking on the sidelines with the White House about what is and isn't going on in their investigation, and giving the White House PR advice about bad press they're getting related to that investigation. What was the actual quote from the deputy director of the FBI there? It was, quote, "I want you to know that the New York Times story is BS." Well, the biggest way this was messed up, what happened back there in mid-February, the biggest screw up of all of this is that the New York Times story wasn't BS at all. The Times published this initial report. Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. They reported this initial report. They posted this on February 14th. Later that night, CNN reported their own version of the story. Trump aides were in constant touch with senior Russian officials during the campaign. Then the Washington Post got the story too. Quote, U.S. intelligence reports cite multiple contacts between members of Trump's team and Russians with links to the Kremlin during the campaign and afterward, according to officials who have seen those reports. By March, it is multiply sourced. American allies, including the Brits and the Dutch, have provided information describing meetings in European cities between Russian officials and others close to Russian President Vladimir Putin and associates of Donald Trump. And then further confirmation thereafter. British intelligence passed Trump associates' communications with Russians onto U.S. counterparts. Oh, wait, further confirmation. Quote, through summer 2016, a number of Western spy agencies shared information with the United States government on contacts between Trump's inner circle and Russians. All of that backing up that initial bombshell New York Times report from February 14th. So when the FBI's deputy director inexplicably went up to the White House and did a pull-aside to talk to the president's chief of staff about the FBI's ongoing investigation into the president's campaign, and he told the White House chief of staff that this New York Times story was BS. Not only was that a scandal in its own right, because the FBI deputy director shouldn't be talking about the FBI's investigation with the White House, not only was it a scandal because it resulted in the White House enlisting as their PR flacks the members of Congress who were supposedly running the independent congressional investigations into Trump and Russia. That moment, that day, that was also a scandal because that New York Times story really was not BS. It's been borne out by weeks and months of independent reporting since then, all of which has corroborated the Times' story. And if you don't believe any of the other press about it, if you don't believe any other reporters, because all news is fake news. Well, this week it was even confirmed on the record, under oath, by the man who was the director of national intelligence at the time.
Over the spring of 2016, multiple European allies passed on additional information to the United States about contacts between the Trump campaign and Russians. Is this accurate?
I can't answer that.
General Clapper, is that accurate?
Yes, it is, and it's also quite sensitive.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
The specifics are quite sensitive.
We got reports from multiple European allies about them observing contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Is that accurate? Yes, that's accurate. It's quite sensitive, but yes, that's accurate. That's confirmed under oath by the Director of National Intelligence. So when the Deputy Director of the FBI went up to the White House and said, New York Times reporting on that exact thing, that reporting is BS, you know what? That reporting was not BS at all. Why the heck was the Deputy Director of the FBI running to the White House and calling that apparently true story, that now confirmed story, why was he calling that BS? Why was he giving the White House that ex parte advice on their bad press? Why was he talking to the White House ex parte about this investigation at all? What the heck was the Deputy Director of the FBI doing? I don't know. I've never known. It's been one of the weirdest parts of this investigation all along. But now the deputy director of the FBI has been promoted. He's now the director of the FBI, the acting director of the FBI, which means he's now leading the FBI investigation into the Russian attack on our election and the Trump campaign's potential involvement in it. His name is Andrew McCabe. He reportedly took a long in-person meeting with the president yesterday at the White House, and now he has been put in charge at the FBI, including in charge of the Trump-Russia investigation. Given his previous named individual role in communicating inappropriately with the White House about this investigation, given his extraordinary effort to kibosh damning reporting about this story, reporting that we now know is well corroborated and multiply sourced and confirmed as true by the Director of National Intelligence, isn't there an issue here with Deputy Director Andrew McCabe taking over the lead in the FBI's Trump-Russia investigation? Isn't there? How can he specifically be the one who's leading this investigation now? Today, the New York Times, and then the Washington Post, and then the Wall Street Journal, and NBC News, eventually everybody confirmed this story today, that in the days before he was fired yesterday, FBI Director James Comey went to the Deputy Attorney General and requested additional resources for the Trump-Russia investigation. We do not know what the response was to that request. We do know that Director Comey told members of Congress, he told Senators Richard Burr and Senator Mark Warner on Monday night that he had made that request to DOJ for more resources. So those senators presumably can corroborate that he told them about having made that request for more resources. Weirdly, the Department of Justice is denying he ever made that request. But in any case, the following day, James Comey got fired from his job as director of the FBI. So whatever additional resources he apparently wanted for that investigation, history will show that "you're fired" was the response. Things are happening very fast now. The White House has now said that the president has hired a major Washington, D.C. law firm to represent him on Trump-Russia matters. We don't know which firm yet, but we are trying to figure that out right now as we speak. We have also learned tonight that former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn has now been subpoenaed to hand over documents to the Senate Intelligence Committee in their Trump-Russia investigation. Mike Flynn declined yesterday to hand over documents to the committee voluntarily. Now they're subpoenaing him. This is the first subpoena sent by the Senate Intelligence Committee since the 9/11 investigation. One of the things to watch on Mike Flynn and on other Trump campaign figures, particularly people who find themselves sort of in the crosshairs here, one of the things to watch here in an ongoing way with each development in the news here is whether those folks who are in the crosshairs and potentially have stories to tell about what happened here between the Trump campaign and Russia, one of the things to watch here is whether those individual people from Trump world are facing any sort of pressure from potential prosecution, pressure that could be used as leverage to conceivably make them flip on those above them in the hierarchy, so they can save themselves from going to the pokey by telling tales about people who might be bigger fish. So the first subpoenas now flying in this investigation mean that we can now invoke that dynamic and start watching for that. We've got the Senate Intelligence Committee, again, subpoenaing Mike Flynn tonight. We've also got both CNN and CBS now reporting that federal prosecutors have sent grand jury subpoenas related to Mike Flynn to his business associates. So two different types of subpoenas now sort of orbiting around the Mike Flynn part of this story. Also, keep an eye on Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign chairman. We do not know if Paul Manafort also refused to hand over documents voluntarily to the Senate Intelligence Committee yesterday. The committee has not announced whether or not he handed over those documents they had requested. But there are some interesting loose threads to watch with Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort, obviously the former campaign chairman for the Trump campaign. I just want to give you one heads up about him now, that there is a new, very large, very interesting question mark about Paul Manafort and his potential involvement with the Justice Department. Okay, this is something that we've got a beat on, that we are actively reporting tonight. Literally, while I am on the air, we are trying to continue to report this out. I swear we will have news on that We will have an answer on that for you by tomorrow at this time at the latest. But the way things have been going today, we might have it before the end of this hour. So stick a pin in that. Busy night. Lots more to come.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.